Hey ho, yeah.
Ow! I want to thank everybody for tuning in to this episode of Res Dog Walkers. I was really excited for my next guest, and then he happened to show up wearing a Red Sox jersey. But he is one of Vancouver Magazine's 50 power people for the third time, I've come to understand. But it's a great honor. I've got my friend Wade Grant from the Musqueam Nation. He's not only been a dear close friend of mine for a number of years, our parents worked together for a number of years, and you and I stumbled into mainstream politics around the same time. I know when I first started hanging around the Premier's office, you happened to be in the Premier's office, and you know, we've been able to kind of learn from each other and kind of take some hard lumps and go through it. So thanks for coming, Wade. How are you?
I'm doing well, Dallas, and I would really like to thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure. It's an honor to be here with you and to be able to have a conversation like we always do. I think that you and I, when we get together, it's always fun. So I'm looking forward to this.
Definitely. I really appreciate you making it today. But first, we got to get this air cleared. The Red Sox. I mean, I'm a diehard Jays fan. I don't know why. I guess both the Jays and the Cowboys were really good when I started drinking beer. And
Okay.
I won't determine that age right now because my mom may watch this. I don't know. She might be one of our 12 listeners. So I don't want to divulge that too soon. But the Red Sox.
Baseball is my favorite sport. I grew up, everybody in our country played soccer, right? In Musqueam and in North Island, soccer was the number one sport as I was growing up. But baseball was my favorite sport. And my name's Wade. And Wade's not a very common name. It's one that I never heard besides my own self. And then in 1986, the Red Sox and the Mets were on TV playing in the World Series. And the third baseman for the Red Sox was Wade Boggs. And I was like, right then, that's my team, that's my guy. And I've been a Red Sox fan. I went through a lot of torture for about 20 years until 2004 when they finally broke the curse. So huge baseball fan, huge Red Sox fan, just love the sport.
Nice. And it's amazing how, you know, all of us who have a team, there's one sort of moment in usually your youth that kind of crystallizes that. And so it's great to hear that that's why you wear that. Well, I won't call it an ugly shirt because that's disrespectful. And I'm in your territory, so I got to play by a little bit better rules. But how are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. You know, I'm busy with work and sit on a number of boards around the province, and my children are growing up fast, so they keep me very busy as well. So before I got here, I dropped them off at school, and I will be picking them up later in this afternoon and spending the rest of the weekend with them. So keeping them busy.
How many people in Vancouver Magazine's 50 Most Power are dropping their kids off and picking them up at the end of each day?
I have no idea. But that's what I said last night, is that the reason why I do, and I think the reason why you do what you do, is I know you've got a large family as well, is that you do it for the next generation and making sure that they're raised in the right way, just as our parents and our grandparents instilled that in us. I always say that the reason why I do what I do is for my children, but I also do what I do for those that came before me, because if it wasn't for them and the fight that they put forward as Indigenous people, we wouldn't be here today. So carrying that on and instilling that in my children.
You know, I'm glad you put it that way, because as I was saying during the intro, you know, my father, Chief John Smith, your mother, your stepfather, your dad, you know, they worked very closely in some of those trenches that put leadership like us in a position to actually be successful. I think of the years of going to the AFN, and, you know, your mom would be there and Ed John would be there, and I'd be there with my dad and Bill Wilson, and all the table pounding that went on, followed by eloquent speeches, but it never really went anywhere. And it's really only over the last few years that some traction has been made around reconciliation. And I say that as a whole, kind of across BC sort of thing. I understand a lot of nations have been doing a lot of work for a long time that's starting to pay dividends, but just give me some of your thoughts on, you know, the role as someone who went to meetings as a young guy. You know, I think we probably met when we were in our early teens because we'd follow our parents to meetings during the summer. But just give me some of that perspective on growing up in a family that already played leadership roles in mainstream politics. I mean, we all grew up in communities where we have cultural leaders and we have grandpas and we have aunties and we have uncles who help instill life values in front of us. But you and I grew up in a world where we were fortunate to have that. But now I'm lucky for those years that I spent with people like Simon Lucas and George Watts and your mom and other people like that. So just maybe give me some of your thoughts on that.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things I always try to do is emulate what my mom and my dad did, is bringing my kids to these meetings, because if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't understand how we got to where we are today. We're so lucky that we are able to sit at a negotiation table, because our parents were on the front lines protesting in the 50s and 60s. Those were the days. That was where the hard work was put in to have our people recognized and our people's rights and title recognized. They went on the front lines, then they went to court and won. And we've seen so many court cases in British Columbia that have shaped Aboriginal rights in this country. We have the Sparrow case, Delgamu, Haida, Chilcotin, all these things that have happened over the years, and seeing the hard work that they put in so that we could be sitting at these tables. Now we're in the negotiation part of it, because people have worked so hard and fought so valiantly to get where we are today. So sitting with my parents, I didn't realize how frustrating it must have been with them in the 80s and the 70s, before we had won all these court cases, before we had the ear of government. It was them pounding those tables and making sure that our voice, the echoes of our ancestors, were heard in things like the Constitution talks of 1982. Those types of things have put us where we are. And I don't want my kids to forget that as well. So that's why I bring them whenever I can to events and to meetings, just like your father did for you.
Nice. And I'm starting to do that with my kids, but they're like, yeah, Dad, you saved the Great Bear Rainforest. We get it. But it's an interesting, because it brings up conversation at the dinner table. Just, oh, Dad, you talked to so-and-so today. What did that mean? And to see the next generation getting the skill set, because it evolves. That skill set evolves. You know, when you and I were young people, if you weren't going to school to become a doctor or a lawyer, there was no point in going to university, sort of thing. And now we're in this world where we just want our kids to be very good at whatever they do. And I guess I'm using that as a bit of a segue, because, we talk regularly, but I follow you on social media. And why don't you fill us in a little bit on some of the work that your daughter's doing right now?
My daughter she's just turned 13. My daughter has been involved in a number of different extracurricular activities, but the one that she is most proud of is that she got into acting when she was about 8 or 9 years old. Got her very first part when she was 10, and was on TV. And now she's made a number of different short films and been in Hallmark movies and Hallmark television shows. And most recently, she was in a film that she shot back in Six Nations at the Indian Residential School in Six Nations. So it's called Little Deer, and it's been released. It's going through the festivals right now, and she most recently was awarded the Best Youth Performer at the Montreal Independent Film Festival. So she's an up and comer. I support her 100%, and she's got another movie already booked that's coming up to film in the next couple of months. So she's doing well, and she's still doing well in school, which is the most important part.
Definitely. As our aunties would remind us, if you're not doing well in school, you're not doing any of these things, no matter how much you enjoy them. It's funny when you sit down with someone that you've known for so long, and then you sit in this official setting, you're like, okay, where do we start? Do I have notes? Do I have this? The notes really don't matter today. That's the great thing about one of these conversations. I think back to a meeting that I had with Ken Dobell. And you walked in, I think we were at the Pan Pacific, and we had a breakfast meeting talking about, we were with Lee Doney, and we're talking about a deal that we just finally announced, I believe, in the legislature about 4 months ago, about our acquisition of TFL 39 with Western Forest Products. That discussion started back when you were in the Premier's office in 2015, 2016. But I guess just by way of context, what made you decide to go down that route? That was an interesting. I mean, you've been a young guy. You've been, working in so many different fields and positions and supporting your people. What made you decide to go take a shot at the Premier's office?
Well, I was on my chief and council for 10 years, and I was lucky enough to have some experience outside of my community. I went to the University of British Columbia, and then I went to work for Sean Atleo, who was the regional chief at the time, and then worked for the 2010 Winter Olympics. where I was the assistant general manager for the Four Host First Nations Pavilion. That I met a gentleman by the name of Dan Doyle there. He became the chief of staff to the premier, and I just got a phone call one day and said, "We're looking for somebody to come help us with some Indigenous First Nations issues in the premier's office. Would you want to come?" And I said, when the premier's office calls you, I said, absolutely, I'll come, because, you know, I always say that I'm Musqueam first, but I recognize that the 203 First Nations in this province, vastly different. We absolutely, you know, we have our different cultures, our different traditions, our different histories, but we have commonalities. And the commonality that we have is that we all were oppressed by colonization and the thumb of government. And to be able to be a part of trying to find a solution, not saying I know what the solution is, because the solution is different for every single First Nation in this province. And it's having the ability to have dialogue, to ensure that the respect is there. It's mutual between the two parties, and to be able to you know, go into communities where I already had experience working with Sean Atleo, ensuring that the government knew how to go in the right way, was something that was really exciting to me, because I wanted to change how relationships were going, because for many years they were frayed, and to be able to pick up that sewing needle and try to fix that frayed thread is something I always like to do. I like to bring people together rather than sit and point at what. I'm a glass half full person. It's a cliche, I will say. I am a glass half full person. I don't look at the glass and say, why is that glass half empty? I say, how can I fill the rest of that glass up so we all can take a sip of that water? So that's really what excited me, was to be able to provide that expertise. In some cases it worked. Some cases I wish I had another chance. You know, I'm not going to say I batted 1,000, but I did my best, and I continue to do that.
Well, you know, I got to tell you, bro, I've worked with 5 different premiers now, and there's no one in any of those offices who bat 1,000. So just the fact that you got on the field is a huge advancement, because I remember when Gordon Campbell first came to power, he had Alan Adzurza as his First Nations advisor, but it was literally just on advice that he wanted the answer for. And we've seen the evolvement, you know, yourself and some other people who started to play a role at that level. And I think a Don Bain now, who really has the tireless job of trying to achieve what's good for the Premier's office while trying to find that integration and those frayed threads, that you will. And so I think everything always has to evolve a little bit. And obviously you played a major role in helping that happen. If I remember correctly, you almost threw your hat in the ring in, was it 2017 or was it in?
Yeah, no, it wasn't 2017.
It was a follow-up, because I went in 2017. We'll talk about that after. But.
Absolutely, I would love to throw my hat in the ring one day. I mean, but I've always said that I'm a person that I'm from Musqueam. I grew up in South Vancouver, Southwest Vancouver. To be able to, you know, represent my community, not just Musqueam, but the community that helped raise me, which is the Dunbar, Kerrisdale, Kitsilano area. I went to a Southlands Elementary School. I went to Point Grey Secondary School. There's so many people that influenced me, not just in Musqueam, but the teachers. I saw my grade 10 math teacher last night and talked to him and told him, you know, the influence that he had. I didn't respect it at the time, because I was a teenager, and you know, your teachers are there bothering you when you're in high school. But then after you look back at it and realize that every person who you know, taught you is somebody that created and molded you into the person you are today. So to give back and creating an opportunity for me to really recognize the community that has helped raise me is something I've always wanted to do. My parents and grandparents have always sort of raised me to be that way. So one day, maybe I'll throw my hat in the ring and move on that way and follow in your footsteps.
Well, I hope you follow a little further than my footsteps went. But, you know, my journey was similar. You know, Christy Clark and I had this strange relationship where I would just always not complain to her, but tell her what was wrong with her government. And she finally turned on me one day and she just said, if you know so much about what's wrong with my government, come join me and fix it. And at first it was a little tongue-in-cheek, like, haha, you're funny. And we just had that style. Then she sent me a text message, and then we had a follow-up call. And then kind of the liberal machine starts calling. You know, you get a call from a couple MLAs saying, hey, we hear you're thinking about it. And I went through the same thought process. I was like, okay, I'm a First Nations guy. I'm a First Nations leader. I've been working for First Nations communities for most of my career. But I have this whole area around me that needs a voice to represent it. And in the north end of the island, we really fall victim to party politics. It's not really about the representative. It's more about the party in power in there. We had the one blip where Rod Visser got in for the one term, but it's always predominantly been an NDP riding. And so that part of it kind of intrigued me as well, saying how much would my First Nations ancestry help me or hurt me should I go down this road? Ironically, I had more support outside of the First Nations community than I did within the First Nations community, but it was a learning process. I think, like you said, if you go through any kind of system or value and people put an investment of time and discussions and knowledge into you, you have to learn from it. And I think it's actually helped me, even though, you know, I came 2,600 votes shy, we gave it a really good hard run and we opened people's eyes. Ellis Ross was in the same class as I was as he became in cabinet he became an MLA and then got his short stint in cabinet until the power broking deal got done between the NDP and the Greens. But I think we're starting to see, I don't want to say a floodgate mentality, but I think we're starting to see a lot of effective First Nations leaders realize that their voice means so much more beyond the reservation.
Absolutely. I think, I 100% agree. And, you know, when I go out and speak, I'm not speaking as a Musqueam person. I don't want people to think if I ever did run that I'm the First Nations candidate or the Indigenous candidate. I'm proud to be Musqueam, but I'm also proud to be from Vancouver, British Columbia, and Canada because, you know, I always say to people, they may see that I don't look 100% First Nations because I'm not. My grandfather, Hong Tim Hing, immigrated from just outside of Zhongshan, China in the 1920s. He paid the head tax. He tried to find a better life. Unfortunately, at that time, there was rampant racism against Asian people, so he came and worked down in Musqueam on our gardens and married my grandmother. They had 4 kids, and you know, my grandfather was somebody that was looking for or aspiring for this country to be a better place. You know, he died in the 1950s, so he probably never saw it. My grandmother was a Caucasian. On my mother's side, was a Caucasian immigrant as well. So she was, you know, these are people that are looking for Canada to come together, and the mosaic we see today wasn't there back when they were there, but they are people that I stand firmly on their shoulders because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be where I am today. And my parents have always said, yes, be proud of who you are as Musqueam, but also be proud of being the grandson of a Norwegian immigrant and the grandson of a Chinese immigrant, and speak for everybody. So it's not just about speaking for Musqueam, it's about speaking for everybody that lives in our riding and lives in our province and our country. So that's really what drives me as well.
Nice. You know, you brought up Sean Atleo. I actually forgot you were on Sean's staff back in the BCAFN days. You know, when he got elected to national chief, it was an amazing time. I believe we were in Calgary for that election. But it's funny because Grand Chief Stuart Phillip and I never really see eye to eye on many issues, but we were locked in step during Sean's whole election time. And that was one of my first opportunities because I've always been John Smith's son.
Yeah.
And that was one of the first times, let's send Dallas to go talk to Manitoba, or Dallas can go with Dan George to go talk to the Ontario guys, or with, you know, your stepdad was playing a major role in Sean's campaign. And so that was an interesting time for me just to sort of spread my wings a little bit. And it's funny because I got that time, the election had done, Sean had won, you know, we were standing beside him during all of his interviews. And I sat down and had dinner with Stuart. We had breakfast with Stuart. I guess it was early morning because we went that 5 ballots or 6 ballots.
I remember it was.
Until the last one, it was the longest one.
I left Calgary the evening. I went home. I flew from Calgary to Vancouver, went to bed, and I woke up in the morning. It was still going. So that's how long it went. I remember that election. Yes, yeah. So you had breakfast with Stuart?
I had breakfast with Stuart, and we kind of we don't really get along on very many issues. He's like, nope, but we're fighting for the same thing. And that's why I respect you. And to just have one of our elder statesmen like Stuart be able to say, I recognize the role that you're playing and it's an important role, even if I don't agree with it, you know, or even if I don't agree with what you're doing, I really applaud you for doing it because it's something that needs to be done. And I think that's something that our generation needs to make sure that we do, is passing down that support. And we get so caught up in the, you like TMX, or you like fish farms, or you don't like this and you don't like that. And it really disrupts the relationships that are necessary.
Yeah.
Just what some of your thoughts on that, seeing how it used to be where we were all cordial. BC guys all fought for BC issues, and now we seem to pick issues and get behind them, and it's a little bit divisive. What's your thoughts?
Absolutely. I think that we get lumped in as First Nations people, as 203, that people don't recognize that we're not all the same. We're not all going to have the same issues. We're not going to have the same wants and needs. And when one nation signs an agreement that is going to benefit their nation, who am I to tell them that that's right or wrong? Their elders, their leaders have said, this is the path that we want to go on. This is what is going to bring prosperity to our nation. I'm not going to criticize any nation for negotiating any deal that they're negotiating, just as I would hope they'd give Musqueam the same respect for what they negotiate. I know that there are people out there that don't agree 100% with what Musqueam has done, but the thing is that we have to respect that we have fought so hard to get to that the position where we can make those decisions. 50 years ago, 75 years ago, we couldn't even sign those papers because we weren't even at the table to sign those papers. Mm-hmm. So now we are there. So who am I to criticize others? Because I want you to recognize my self-determination, my nation's self-government, my nation's ability to make those decisions. So I respect all 203 First Nations, and because of that respect, I want to support them in whatever way. I'll give you an example. The three nations that call Vancouver their traditional territory. Mm-hmm. We don't always see eye to eye, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, but we recognize that we are all family. We've all been here since time immemorial, and to come together as three nations was going to benefit our communities more than us just fighting over our territory. So to look past our differences, to look past our disagreements, and really bring home and respect the 7 generations ahead, and knowing that the decisions we make today are going to be either positive or negative for those and I'll choose the positive ones any day of the week. So that's why I want to look past that and respect anybody's decision just as well as they respect mine.
That's awesome. And, we're starting to see a bit more of that being brought into things. I mean, when we're all on the stage advocating for whatever we're there advocating for that day, obviously it's kind of game mode, dude, mm-hmm. like we're doing this. But I think of, some of my interactions with Wayne. My brother Tuma is almost adopted by your community to a certain, at least he's a resident of your community.
He's pretty much my sister's husband.
So,
yes,
yes, exactly. So we have these little ties that tie us away from all the other crap that we're dealing with. Yep. And I'm glad that we're at a position where we're having some challenging discussions in an official room, but at the end, it's left in that room. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the great things that I think a lot of your leadership has brought mm-hmm. to helping your people understand that. Because like I said, I've seen people get dug in on some of those things, but the fact of respect, I think, is the basis of the relationships that we're rebuilding after colonization and other efforts took their best shot at kicking.
Well, I think we're still, because of these disagreements and, I don't want to call them arguments, discussions that are not really the most comfortable ones, are still remnants of colonization, because they took us apart from our communities. They took us off our land and put us on small postage stamps reservations. And, because we didn't have a written language, we only had oral history. So my oral history tells me that I've lived here since time immemorial, that we used Vancouver all the way up to Lions Bay, across to Burrard Inlet, down to almost the United States border. That's what my history has told me. That's what I believe. But I know there are histories in other nations that will not agree with that. But I'm not going to say that your history is wrong because my history is right. I think that we can find the mutual understanding in both histories to find a path forward. So I'm somebody that's trying to find those ways and bringing people back to our traditional forms of governance, where we come in Musqueam, we come into the Longhouse and talk and try to find consensus. We may not always find consensus, but we give us our best shot. And when you walk into the Longhouse, my elders always said there's an imaginary hook on outside the door, and you hang up all your bad feelings and all your anger at that hook, and you walk in for the best interests of everybody in the community. And when you walk out, ignore the hook. Don't pick it up again. So that's what really drives me when I go to those types of tables as well.
No, that's great. And I mean, we talk about how these relationships and how colonization fractured some of them, but you brought up a good point when you talked about, you got your territory and the values that your family and the areas that your family have said are part of your lineage, part of your areas of interest. And I think about, young Chief Harley Chappell out in Semiahmoo. I actually grew up in White Rock. My parents didn't want me to grow up in Alert Bay because the school system was challenging. There's a lot of social challenges in the community during the time when I was born, and so they moved to suburban White Rock, and I grew up there till I was 18 years old. But Chief Harley Chappell and I went to school together. As you talked about, I'm not predominantly looking a First Nations person, even though my mother's 7/8 and my dad's full-blooded, but I'm fairly light-skinned, and so Chief Chappell or Harley had to put up with so much shit and abuse, and there were certain times where I felt obligated to step in and sort of, as a little bit older, a little bit bigger, and kind of help him out a little bit. But then to come together years later and he be the chief of his community, me playing a leadership role. But then it was actually William Housty from Bella Bella who pointed out to me that, and I knew my great-great-great-grandfather had 3 brothers. One of them lived in Bella Bella, and one of them made it down to Semiahmoo and lived in Semiahmoo, who was Harley's great-great-great-grandfather. And so we find these connections that we didn't even, we grew up together and didn't know this. And it wasn't until after the fact where people were doing genealogy and lineages and all this that we're able to really say, oh my God, like we've been connected for 5 generations now. And so when we talk about that 7 generations, there's a reality there. I know a lot of allies like to pretend they understand what that really means. I hear a lot of people talking about 7 generations, but just in the couple stories you and I have told, we've illustrated 4 to 5 generations of lineage that have passed down knowledge and energies for us to keep doing what we're doing. But then to see that further evolution through our children and expanding that and sort of saying, if your daughter wants to be an actress, let's make sure we support her to be the best actress that she can and have all the tools that she needs. My daughter wants to be a marine biologist, which is great because I'm fighting the fish farm fight, which I need marine biology to help, clarify some myths there. But like I said, it's so important for us to be able to get in a position where we can support that future generation. And the fact that people like yourself and I think of Corey and Jody Wilson, who grew up in the same circle. Corey and Jody are way older than you and I, but I'm just saying that because Corey's probably going to be my next guest on Red Dog Walk. Oh, she probably won't be now.
She lives in Musqueam, so be careful.
Yes, I better watch my P's and Q's a little bit. The Moccasin Telegraph moves pretty quick sometimes. But again, just, we're watching generations of family take the struggle to a different level. And I think that's where I was going with the whole getting into mainstream politics. You went into the Premier's office. I do remember that when they were looking for a candidate, they were going to try talking you into throwing your name on a ballot for a little while. And I'm glad you're still thinking about that because I think it's important for our people to get involved in all the parties. Bob Chamberlain and I argue profusely, but we supported each other wholeheartedly when I ran for the Liberals and when he ran federally for the NDP, because those parties need our voices in them. If they want to keep talking about ending colonization and bringing reconciliation, they need Indigenous people to advise them at a representative level.
Absolutely. And, I think that it's about doing the good work, absolutely. But the next generation, when they see somebody in a leadership role outside of their community, as an MP or an MLA, it does have a profound impact. You can see yourself in somebody that's playing a role. I'm going to be simple about this next comment that I make, but me, when I was a kid, I always looked for the Indigenous character on television or the Indigenous character because I saw them in me. I loved watching G.I. Joe when I was a kid, and they had a Native American character called Spirit, and he was my favorite character because he was Indigenous.
He was a badass.
And he was a badass, and he had an eagle, but he was the only Indigenous character. He was the only First Nations character. that you could have. So it was something I was always playing with that character because I saw myself in him. I didn't really understand why at that time, but now I look back at it, I was always looking for somebody that represented me as a person, and I think my kids do too. My daughter and my son, they're so proud to see people taking up leadership roles. They're so proud to see. I mean, they rarely ever want to be with dad anymore because they're 15 and 13, but they came with me last night to the Power 50 because they wanted to be with dad when he got the award. And, it made my year to be able to spend that time with my kids because I do know that they do care.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what are you actually doing now? You're one of those guys who's like me. You got 3 or 4 different jobs, and you kind of do them all to your best of your ability. What are they right now?
I still work with my band.
Okay.
I do a lot of intergovernmental affairs work using the experience and the connections that I've made over the years, not only at a provincial level, but a federal level. After we left government in 2017, a lot of my friends in the Premier's office and elsewhere went and worked federally. So I still have a lot of connections at all levels of government. The provincial government, like I said, when you're Indigenous, you can't really plant your flag in one party. You got to be able to be friends with all the parties. So I have those connections there, and then municipally with the city of Vancouver. I was on the Vancouver Police Board for a number of years and was able to really get to understand how the city works. And the city has come a long way when it comes to recognizing First Nations, the local First Nations rights. As a municipal level, they are not held to account like the Crown is, right? But this city, I can see, is working and going above and beyond what they need to do. A lot of work still yet to come, but we're on the right track. So sitting at those tables with my chief and council, that's what I do on a daily basis with Musqueam. But I sit on the First Nations Health Council of British Columbia. I am the chair of the First Nations Health Council, which is the advocacy body on health and wellness for First Nations in BC. We represent the 203 First Nations. There's 15 of us. I represent the South Coast, Vancouver Coastal. Just recently, we passed a 10-year strategy on the social determinants of health, looking to have First Nations reclaim health and wellness for their own communities, because we know that health and wellness is unique to every First Nation. There's different ways of them reconnecting to their health, reconnecting to their land-based healing, their water-based healing. Those types of things need to be taken into account, because we know as Indigenous people, our medicine people, our traditional forms of healing are just as, if not more powerful than Western forms sometimes. So we're working on that on the First Nations health side. I'm also the chair of the New Relationship Trust, which was,
That's right. That's the one. That's the one.
The New Relationship Trust was a $100 million trust that was set up during the Gordon Campbell government that is still at $100 million, which is to help strengthen governance and nation rebuilding in First Nations across the province of British Columbia. And a big part of nation rebuilding is making sure that we have youth and others that are coming up to become leaders in their community. So we provide a lot of scholarships to First Nations across BC, and over the last 15 years, we've seen those kids that have got those scholarships become doctors, become lawyers, become band managers, and some of them have now become chiefs of their communities. So it's something that I am very proud of. Another board I sit on is Covenant House Vancouver, which is an organization that provides housing and shelter for homeless and at-risk youth. And for me, being a part of that board is very important, because, as you know, we make up less than 5% of the population of British Columbia, First Nations people, but we make up 30% of the kids that walk through the door of Covenant House, because they're away from their home, they're homeless, they're hundreds, if not thousands of miles away. So to be a part of an organization that provides that to our youth is something that makes me proud. And I sit on a number of other boards where I share Boys and Girls Club of Canada, the H.R. Macmillan Space Center, which is the planetarium. I sit on that board. So keeping myself busy when my kids are at school.
Nice. And, some of those boards you go on because they need the capacity filled, and some of them you go on because they're a heartfelt project.
Yeah.
They're something that you need to do. I notice as I've gotten in a position where I can be a little bit more selective with how I invest my time back into our community. I go through sort of the similar thing, but it's even neat seeing the evolution of board structures with Indigenous people. I mean, I remember when Campbell first came to power, they put a couple of these committees up, and I got put on a couple of them to be seen but not heard.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not how it works with this guy. You've known this guy
Oh,
for
yeah,
a little bit of
absolutely.
time. And
Yeah.
so we learned how to play those roles and put them into different positions. But I think just seeing that we're actually putting First Nations people in seats to give advice about First Nations issues is a huge step, because so many people can pick up the newspaper. I'm aging myself here, look at me. So many people can pick up their phone and read about all the problems that we're facing. And I don't think enough people realize how many people are actually putting in a lot of work to change those systems.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was working in the province of BC, my office was right next door to Board Resourcing, which is the province's agency that assigns board members to different boards. And they'd always come and ask me, because people don't know that there are so many well-educated, driven First Nations people and leaders in our communities that don't get outside of our communities because people don't know of the work that they do. So having me in the Premier's office was another avenue to be able to identify those people, to make sure that those people that had that strong voice could be on these boards. And I'll take an example. Chris Lewis from the Squamish Nation, a very close friend of mine, used to be on the Squamish
He was
Nation.
on the Sean Atleo staff.
He was on the staff with me,
right,
with me. And
just to be clear, who
was what?
Who was between you and the chief? You and Chris?
Between
Chief Atleo? I mean, you both were a foot taller than him. But...
Yeah, Chris and I were equal.
Equal?
We're equal,
okay,
yes.
Okay. That's good. That's keeping the whole MST thing balanced.
He's
like
still
that.
a very close friend.
Yes,
He's,
that's a mind, yeah.
He was a person that came to mind one day when SFU was looking for a board member, and I said, Chris would be great. And Chris is still with SFU. He's got a very high-ranking position there now, but now Chris is on the ICBC board. You know, these types of things where people can recognize that there are so many people out there that if they just get the chance to show how effective they are, they'll be able to provide that voice that wasn't heard before. So having that, and that's why it's great that when I left, Don Bain came in as the Premier's advisor. Don Bain is a very close friend of mine, and I know he's doing a great job. And now we have Doug White in the Premier's office as well. So we've got two very strong voices in Indigenous issues advising the top person in this province. So a lot has changed in the last 15 years, and I think it's changed for the better.
No, definitely. I mean, and it's funny where that actually started, because I got my career starting in the late 90s during kind of the end of the NDP era. Mm-hmm. You know, I think I sat down with Dan Miller once during his time, and I think my first agreement signed with the Premier was with Ujjal Dosanjh just before he went out the door. But then when Gordon Campbell came in, there's this whole different mindset. I mean, the 77-2 seat thing was one thing, but I got to meet guys like Stan Hagen and George Abbott, who just really wanted to try and understand First Nations issues a little bit better. And while people like to take shots at the Liberals, or BC United as they're known at now, to me, because I was there, that was where I really started to see traction around reconciliation, because Delgamuukw was in the 90s.
Yeah.
You know, when the last challenge to Delgamuukw came was early 2000, I guess, or 2002, whatever it was. But it was actually Gordon Campbell who started on a path with Jessica McDonald and some other people around him. I'm not going to say it was great.
No.
But he started showing up at the summit meetings to address the chiefs and some of those things. And then Christie took it to a different level. And then John Horgan took it to a different level. And now David Eby has taken it to a new level. And obviously there's some controversy around the Land Act stuff that's going on right now. Mm-hmm. As someone who's been, I don't want to say instrumental, as someone who's helped chart that path at an agreement level between First Nations and governments, it doesn't scare me the way it's scaring everybody else, but he's taken that to a real level now. Mm-hmm. But it's also interesting seeing First Nations have to pick up their game a little bit, because no longer can we just pound the table and say, government, you didn't do this. We have to learn how to integrate ourselves into some of these opportunities that are there where it's beneficial. Obviously, some legislation is always going to continue to need work, or more importantly, the policy to implement that legislation is going to need to do work. But what have you seen on the progression of just the rights and title discussion through
absolutely.
the years?
I'm not going. in the 90s, I was still just coming out of high school. So I was in the
I'm
early,
like right between you and your sister in
the early 2000s. Absolutely, what I do remember is coming out of the gate, the liberal government. There was a bit of a stumble because they had that referendum on the treaty, on the Nisga'a Treaty, right? Yeah. Which was, and rightfully so, was angered a lot of First
Remember
Nations.
Judith Sayers with the arrow, and she shot into had all the ballots from when they tried to have the referendum. Judith Sayers put a bunch of these ballots into a canoe, and to her credit, she shot a flaming arrow into that canoe, and that was one of my first like, oh, whoa, these guys are weird.
But I think that referendum and how it failed was an eye opener and a wake up call to government that we need to take reconciliation. I'll be honest with you. I always say I use reconciliation because people know what it means, but I don't really think we should use the word reconciliation because on its face, reconciliation says there's a relationship that needs to be reconciled. We never had a relationship with government, so for me, it's new relationship, a new relationship. And so I was working in the government when the new relationship and the leadership council was formed to really have that important dialogue at the highest levels between Premier Campbell, the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, the BCFN, and the First Nations Summit, which created momentum to be where we are today. So there is a good progression, and you're right. Even the gatherings of chiefs and the province and ministers has changed so much too. It's not just talking heads at a table anymore. We are every year. You're there. Is the province sets aside 2 days where they come together with chiefs, and every minister from the province is there. And it's not just talking heads on a stage, is that you get the 8 hours and every chief can try to meet with every minister to talk about the wants and the needs of their own communities. To be able to have that one-on-one is so integral and so important for the communities because it allows them to know what their unique community needs in their, not every community, is being impacted by mining or forestry. Musqueam's not because we don't have forestry here anymore. But we do have issues with regard to fishing and environment and those types of things. And then you have the opportunity for nations in the north to talk about, fracking and all these types of things that are impacting their communities. So we didn't have that 50 years ago. Now we have ministers and the top decision makers sitting with our top decision makers, our chiefs and leaders. So there are still opportunities for us to improve, but it's a lot better than when my mom and dad were, and your dad was at the table.
It's funny that you bring that up because I remember when Christy Clark first came to me about that, I said, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And she says, well, it might be dumb right now, but eventually, because I just called it speed dating.
Yeah. And
you got your 12 minutes, and, the good ministers would spend 7 of those 12 minutes on introductions.
Oh, yeah.
And then, with our guys, they'd ask our guys, how was fishing this year? And so I was like, okay, we're here to talk about health and economic development. And now we've talked about introductions and fishing for 11 of our 12 minutes. But it's evolved into something where there's real dialogue happening now.
I'll be honest with you. I take no offense, but that was my idea to bring it that way. I'll tell you how that idea came about. Is when my first year as the Premier's advisor on Indigenous or First Nations issues, I went to the UBCM municipalities, and they do the same sort of thing. Is that
for sure.
that municipalities have an opportunity to come over to the minister's office and talk about what is happening in Grand Forks, or what's happening in Kimberley, or what's happening in Kitimat. And those communities can come and talk to those ministers one-on-one. And then I went to the First Nations leadership gathering, and it was just a bunch of leaders on the stage, and the chiefs just sitting there and making a presentation. Then chiefs get 25 minutes for question and answer. So I went to the Premier's office and I said, look, I think maybe let's try the UBCM sort of style and see how that works. So that's how it came about. As I was like, why can't we do that with the chiefs? I think that would give them a lot more opportunity, because a lot of chiefs don't like getting up in a plenary style and ask that question. So you always see the same people getting up and using the microphone. This allows those chiefs...
Like your dad or my dad.
Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't going to say any names, but yes. So it allows them to get the opportunity for those chiefs that, don't feel comfortable stand up, but do feel comfortable expressing what they need one-on-one with a chief. So.
And are amazing at it, right?
Yes, they are.
That's the other thing they forget is, just because the 5, 6, 7 people always seem to get up, there's so many eloquent leaders that we have.
Yeah, they're there for a reason, right?
For sure.
So, yeah, absolutely.
No, that's I kind of thought that might have been one of your doings, but like I said, I take full, it's grown into something that's tremendous. Not only from the the short meetings that you have, but you have everybody there, and there's almost a bit of a collegial spirit that's built there. I as you know, I like to kind of walk through, and I got my hat on, and I usually got my walking stick, and I kind of walk through, but even just the fist bumps, you're walking past, like, oh, Doug Call, fist bump as you're walking by, and you get to talk to him, but it's Deputy Minister of Indigenous Relations for a number of years, who's now in the Premier's office. Yeah. But it's all about the relationships and keeping a forum for that to keep functioning.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing, it may seem ceremonial and stuff, things like, recognizing the traditional territory, but where we've come is even farther. Is like this past year, Premier David Eby called up Musqueam and said, you know what, I want to be sworn in Musqueam. And that was the very first time a premier has ever been sworn in anywhere else besides Victoria. He got sworn in on the Musqueam Indian Reserve. And it was, a moment that I won't forget, my community won't forget, that it was, a gesture of that new relationship building, that, the premier is not the premier is the premier of British Columbia, and he's the premier for everybody, including First Nations. And he wanted to share that this moment is for all of us, including Indigenous people. So having that happen in Musqueam was another, just a step showing that the respect is building even further.
No, definitely. It's always interesting on where these go next. We've had DRIPA come in. We've had the feds sort of back that up. I know one of the challenges that I face on a day-to-day basis is it's almost like with my kids, when you're trying to get ready to get out the door, it's like, okay, province, put your shoes on, put your kapoo on, get all ready for this.
Yeah.
And then you turn back and the feds are out eating something. They're not getting ready to go through the door at the same time. And I've sort of been able to learn that you kind of got to keep these discussions moving in parallel lines a little bit as you're starting to, do some work with the feds and do some of that work. How are you finding the relationship with the feds? I know it's night and day from the province, but do you see some potential there?
I do. I think, I can't speak for my mother, but my mother is a very, very influential person in my life, and she still works every day fighting the good fight for Musqueam and self-government. And I see consistent respect on both sides. My mother is at a table on a weekly basis, or was at a table on a weekly basis. The federal government would always be showing up, and I'll give you an example of what's really changing. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, we had the potlatch ban, where if we gathered as First Nations people, we would be arrested if we were in our regalia, singing our songs, dancing our dances. I'm sure there are many artifacts around the world from your community that were stolen, taken away because of the potlatch ban. But we still gather in our longhouses. We still gather in our big houses, and we fought the good fight, so we would still do that. Last year, my kids got their Indigenous names in our longhouse. And my mother and I invited Leader of Opposition Kevin Falcon, Premier David Eby, Mayor Ken Sim, and at the time the Minister of Cerna, Mark Miller. Yeah. And they all came. They all watched our naming of my kids, because we wanted to show them it wasn't just about songs and dances. It wasn't just about regalia. These are our houses of governance. These are our houses of ceremony. These are our universities. These are where our laws are passed down and continue to be passed down. So when you're out on the floor and you're watching my kids get their names, they're getting their names through the laws that were passed down for generations. And I give them all the respect, because they all sat there and watched it. It's not the easiest thing because of the smoke and all these types of things. But can you imagine 100 years ago, those people and who they represented, they would have had, not them in particular, but their governments would have arrested us for the same thing that they were now participating in. So to see that change in 100 years, it's a long time, but there's so much more that we can change. So, I give the federal government respect, because they lived up to their promise. They came out, they're learning, and we still continue that conversation with them today.
That's tremendous. I mean, we talk about that lineage, and, we talked about the generations of, your family and my family. I'm in the process. My dad's 76 now, and he's getting ready to retire. my brother Tuma, who's, with your sister, he's the hereditary chief of our family, and I'm in the process of taking over the transition from the day-to-day leadership of our community. And so Tuma and I are rebuilding a relationship that we hadn't had since we were, teenagers, where we spent some time together. But then he went off fishing, I went off to the Great Bear Rainforest, and now, we're both trying to figure out how to be leaders for our community and do that in that transition of, taking something that's been handed down to us. It's not something that we're creating. It's something that people have already clearly articulated how it needs to be transferred down.
Yep.
And so it's an interesting time for us. And it almost makes you look back a little bit, because I'm sort of like, okay, I've been in a lucky enough position to be able to advise a lot of decision makers, but now I have to start making decisions that are going to affect people. And how's that something you deal with? I mean, I know you do a lot of work on a regular basis for your community that directly affect your kids and their friends and that. How do you deal with that personally?
Well, decision making is, trying to find consensus, and, you're not going to be able to find consensus all the time. An example is last year when I was talking about the First Nations Health Council, we passed a 10-year strategy on the social determinants of health, where we brought together as many First Nations as we could. I think we had over 190 registered out of the 203, which is probably the largest gathering ever, and over 170 of them voted on it. 86% voted in favor to move forward with this plan, but 14% didn't. And I want people to know that 100% we can't get consensus, but we also want to recognize that we want to work with these people that want to go forward with this, but we also want to work with those nations that still have questions. They still have concerns. How can we take those questions and concerns, alleviate them, and roll it back into them? And so I made that commitment that day when we said 86% are voting in favor of this. We'll move forward with it, but I'm going to reach out. I'm going to go visit those communities, whether it be in northeastern British Columbia, southeastern BC, wherever it is. So trying to have that one-on-one, because my dad always says 90% of doing your job is showing up and making sure that I get out there, not just getting on the phone, not just going on a Zoom call, but getting out there so I can go in their places of governance and talk with them mutually. So for me, it's about trying to find that balance of, working with those people that want to move forward, but also working with those people that want to improve what they saw wasn't 100% what they wanted. Yeah.
And I think that's important to realize, that even when we don't agree on the path forward, there's well, sorry, you're shit out of luck, we're just going to go without you.
Yeah.
Because we have this leave no soldier behind mentality. That's
Absolutely.
really important to continue. Just a little bit of segue, as you know, I'm married into Cowichan Tribes now. My mother-in-law is chief of Cowichan Tribes, which creates interesting table discussion from time to time, because Lydia and I don't always agree on the issues at time, but we do agree on how important our kids and family
I
is.
love Lydia very much.
I also love the fact that the family ties that I have bring me closer to you guys. And so hopefully I'll get on Shaughnessy eventually, because of my growing relationship with Musqueam leadership, both culturally, hereditarily, and politically.
And just pick up the phone and we'll get you out there anytime. But yeah, the family relationships, not just in Musqueam, not just in your own community, but the family relationships that we have across the territories. Musqueam has very close relations with people in Stolo, have very close relations on people on the east coast of Vancouver Island. So much so that, we were talking about family, and our families aren't just a traditional style of family in the sense that aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters. My aunts and uncles are some of them are my third and fourth cousins, but because they have that esteem and that respect in the family, their aunt, their uncle, and they live in, Chemainus or Cowichan and those types of things. So the familial ties that we still have are very, very important. So important that my two names of my kids that they got in the Longhouse came from my family in Chemainus. They're not from us. I went over and talked to my elders from Chemainus, and they bestowed those names on the kids. So having that connection is still important about an important part of our governance systems, not just within our community, but across Coast Salish territory. Yeah.
No, I think that's hitting the nail right on the head. We've watched our politics evolve, and we're watching. I don't want to say our culture evolved because it was so much more before colonization.
Yeah.
It sustained us for 14,000 years. You know, the fact that we have so many different languages in BC shows that while there were wars fought, our people got along. Because if we were as romantic and fought as much as everybody likes to say we did or think we did, we'd speak 2 different languages throughout all British Columbia. But there's so many different language groups because we respected each other's autonomies and we had sharing practices. I know we still talk about fishing rights, and you know, if we're drinking a couple adult beverages, the discussion gets a little more animated. But you know, those are issues that we talk about just like our ancestors before us.
Absolutely. And you know, we still have those, you know, those disagreements, and but at the end of the day, like I said, I walk out of those rooms and leave that hook untouched. And you know, I may have those disagreements with my family from other areas, but it doesn't preclude that they're my family first, right? We can have those disagreements, and you know, I don't want that ever to impact how my kids view their aunt or their uncle from other areas.
That's important. And I was thinking of our brother Tuma, how I should take a little shot at him, but he's not here to defend himself. But in our way, like his dad and I are first cousins. My dad is the youngest, or third youngest out of the 11 brothers and sisters that he had. His grandfather, who's our grand chief, was the oldest, and his dad, who died in 1994, was supposed to be kind of the heir apparent, and then that right got passed on to Tuma. But in our way of things, as you know, we don't have cousins. Our cousins are like our siblings in our way of life. And so technically his dad would be like my brother and he's like my nephew.
Yeah, but absolutely.
You should be the one to open that wound for him and just say, hey, I just did a great podcast with your uncle.
Okay,
Dallas
I'll give him a call.
And then if he doesn't punch you, let me know. Or if he punches you, let me know. But he hits like, well, I won't say he hits like what I was going to say.
Like my
because
kids?
I'm politically correct. Yes, he hits like a young person. But dude, this was so awesome. I hope, you know, I'm getting ready to have my feast and potlatch. I hope you'll be able to come up and see me and my kids. The work that you're doing on the Health Council, as you know, my daughter and my family and I have been through tremendously horrible circumstances, and the work that you and the committees and all the thousands of people underneath who do that work in the trenches, like we talked about earlier. People like to complain about health, but when you're actually sick and in a position, the system's getting better. And I was able to experience that firsthand from the First Nation support workers who were able to come in and be supportive of my daughter in a I guess even religious way. It was sort of how that support always comes in circumstances like that. But be able to have people building infrastructure that just helps our people through a scary and complicated system. I just hope the listeners out there understand that it's getting better. It's definitely not getting worse. Social media and all those portrayals may make it sound like it's a dumpster fire going over the edge. But as Wade and myself can attest to, there's hundreds of people working to make all of our people's lives better.
Absolutely, and I raise my hands to each and every one of them. Sometimes it's a thankless job, but it's one that we need to let them know that it is, for me, I grew up in and out of hospital. I had something called pulmonary stenosis. I had 2 open heart surgeries before I was 10 years old. I never ever questioned the health care that I got. I know that I'm not somebody that is unique, but there were cases that is still, you know, make me upset, but we're working very hard to create that culturally sensitive recognition of First Nations health and wellness, to create those healthy, vibrant communities that were here since time immemorial. So, and you're right, it's those thousands of people on the floor, on the ground, doing that work every day. Yeah.
So great to have you aboard. I hope we can have you on again sometime in the future. And I just want to again say how great it is to be able to get into a real discussion. You know, when we get our 7 minutes at a presentation or a panel, you're able to share some basics about what we're doing. But like I said, the real interest in creating this podcast was to have some real discussions with some real people about some real issues. So thanks for being a part of it.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thank you so much for having me, Dallas.
I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in today for this episode of Res Dog Walkers. I'd like to thank my esteemed guest, Wade Grant, one of the 50 power people from Vancouver Magazine, 3-time running. I don't believe any of his mother or father or stepfather have achieved that. So let's all keep up the good work and tune in next time. Gaelicasla.
Hey,